So I'll show you a little bit about the APIs and how people decompose. Usually what people will do is, again, remember data's coming in from routers, switches, hosts. They'll configure up, and we work with them to do this, the ways that they want to slice and dice and see the traffic. Usually it falls into some operational categories, DDoS, and not just DDoS, but really all the things that relate to external traffic and the health of it. For example, Twilio. Am I doing enough traffic to Twilio? What's the latency or actual observed TCP transactional performance to my Google Maps integration for that I need to go for my website? In this case, we didn't really design this to work at low resolution, but so, someone said infrastructure security. A bunch of customers were interested in that. So we said, okay, let's look at things that are the aspects of the way that that group wants to look at the traffic. So it's, people want to eyeball what name servers are going on, or encrypted flow, to your point about exfiltration, are there strange protocols or encrypted flows, or lots of fragments going on, or in this case, we actually program up via API the emerging threats rule set. So basically threat feeds and people who want to correlate against that. One thing I didn't mention, we have one of the columns, or some of the columns that we have at ingest, we take geo, we take BGP data, we also take rules that are like little routing tables on the flow and put what we call tags on. So instead of the arbor where you have to define the managed objects, the tags let you say like my network, customer A, customer B, and that's how we do threat feeds today, is you'll just get a tag on there that you can regex search and say, show me anything that said threat feed anything. And that's usable by the portal, it's usable by the API. So it's just different ways of slicing and dicing. So if I want to click on something, it brings me over to what we call the Data Explorer, which is just a way that you can actually interact with one or multiple devices, which I apologize, it's a little small. You can group, and I'll show you in a second that you can group by multiple dimensions, and then you can add filters. So in this case, it says dest flow tag, I like emerging threats, which is how it pulled out that data. And then, again, we got down to the raw data. If I want to look at something that's more operational, like for an enterprise or a network, who should I peer with? Who should I connect to? For carriers, sometimes they want to know, who should I steal customers from? Who am I peering with that I'm sending the traffic for free, that they have big customers. If I sell to them, now I get paid to carry that traffic on both ends, from my customers and from them. So there's some synergy, there's some differences, but so this is a dashboard that looks at, again, the geo data is from, I forget, MaxMind or someone like that. And if we go down into the data, now we've got both a graphical view and the AS list of who we're talking to. Now, that's one-dimensional grouping. We can change that dimension. Instead of looking by AS number, we can look by, and I apologize that it's so small, we can look by a destination city, or the entire AS path, or if it's from a server, and I'll show you in a few minutes, performance data. Now, I can also, if I want to see more of the flow through the system, because I told you we take the BGP data, I can actually say, add some dimensions. So I can say, I want to see the source prefixes, and then I want to see the destination AS number, and then I want to see the destination city, and in fact, then I'll do what we call a flow diagram. And notice, again, I apologize, I'll try to make the filters bigger. When we clicked over, it pre-populated all the filters. So you can do almost effectively infinite level of depth of what filters you want in the traffic, and it's actually going to go against the raw data and go pull that up. One way we make our system fast, we really do two things. One is for multi-tenancy. One is the data stored per minute and per hour. Any question that you ever ask of the system, we remember the sub-answers on a per minute or per hour basis. So anything that's in a NOC, anything that's scripted, we're only going to disk to get the new information. It just builds that aggregate. The other thing that we do is any query that comes into the system only gets to use so much energy of the system. So if an analyst or if there's a security guy that wants to go look back over every flow, that's rate limited so that the rest of the system doesn't slow down. And that's been a big issue in the big data systems, is that there's typically not that kind of multi-tenancy that you have in a Teradata or something that you couldn't afford. And generally people either use Spark and store everything in RAM, or they just suffer from that problem. So we've now done a few different dimensions of look, and we're building a flow diagram for that so that we can see, okay, the traffic came from these prefixes over here and is going to these ASs in the middle and to those geographies. And I can add filters, I can change the grouping. This build your own flow diagram is relatively new, so customers are just discovering what they could want to do with it. And again, there's a table. Now, for the automation folks and people that are looking to get it, the interesting thing here is everything that the portal does is actually done by making SQL queries at the back end. So this one happens to be a tri-dimensional lookup, so it's a little bit more complex. But if I copy that query, let me get out of full screen, go to my handy dandy shell here, where we've got a PSQL client loaded up, logged in, and I run that same query, I'm going to get the same data. So I can do, let's see what this device was. This device was...
Even for this, can you make a REST call and get JSON back as well?
Yeah, let me show you. I don't have the REST wizardry. I'm an old, whatever, CLI guy. But let me show you I'll show you the REST for it. Data Explorer API. So I'll show you two calls that you could do. One would get just an image. Sorry, bigger on my screen. So one would get an image. So you just connect to the API. You say, I want, from my most exciting router, I want just IP source. But you can add, again, you can add metrics. You can add filters. So we had said your dest AS is 16509 and source AS is 16509. Or to your question, Russ, you can submit JSON and just get the data back in JSON if that's how you'd like. We don't, again, have a connector, but it's easy enough. I think you can also get CSV, images, whatever. What actually happens for people that are looking at is that if I describe that device, cat2cloudhelix.com, which is our old company name, it's a foreign table. So to Postgres, it knows about it, but it's not doing the storage for it. That's our column store on the back end. So I'll tell you very very openly, when I started, I said, look, I've used Silk, I've used NFDump, I've used PM account, I'm tired of these CLIs. Basically when I was doing sensors, everyone needed our help as the wizards to make the flow stuff go. And I said, we're either going to do BPF or SQL. Like some language that people know, that everyone uses. Sysadmins have at least seen, even if they're not experts in. And at Akamai, Akamai uses a system called Query to run their infrastructure. It's just pounding SQL queries. I don't know if you had a tour of the NOC. They have a knowledge-based system. That's like what we designed our alerting system to be. It's just make the SQL queries and then do things as a result. I was a little bit optimistic about the world's desire to write and edit SQL queries, I will admit. So if I were to do it today, I'd probably have the portal do the REST queries and have the SQL be available as a backend so that I could click and just get we're going to have the portal switch from showing you the SQL query to the JSON query, because that's more what people want to do.
Yeah, people are finding more interesting images.
I agree completely. And frankly, the alerting system I'll show you, you'll see it's very nerdy. We have a new one coming out I wish I could show you, but it's basically drag like you can in our filters and draw bars and go boom. Like, is it Riemann? One of the systems that Grafana is integrated with that does alerting is like that. So easy integration, that's what we're going for. I'll show you a couple other things. We have a native data connector to Grafana. So for people that are using metrics, we actually look like a Prometheus or Graphite or any of those backends. And so you can put your system, your application data in, but then do the same kind of We don't have filtering yet, but the same kind of slice and dice. So I can say, okay, now show me the top IP addresses, and it'll look them up. For one or multiple devices, go from bits per second to unique DEST IPs if someone's looking at denial of service. So again, we really want to not trap this. We want this data to be used by people in their other systems. Both as a business, we want people, getting good value from it, and sometimes they'll show us what we should build into our portal by building their own integrations. We really want to not be trapped. I'll show you something that we did that also uses our API. We were briefing a large enterprise who wanted something that was more visual. We don't have any map views right now. So I've always had a big allergy to what everyone calls the pew-pew maps of bullshit, it's background radiation traffic. But we actually did this so that, I don't know if we can turn the lights down a little bit, but
Look.
hard to see. So this is actually a graph of flow to the edges. And if I go on top of San Diego, it just sub-selected out. Now, this is where the actual reality of the internet falls down from theory. Some of the prefix space that we're using was my Usenet provider before, and from IP space from a company I bought that was in San Diego. So it's still registered in ARIN there. We're actually still exchanging some Usenet traffic with Highwinds, which is IP addresses in Winter Park, Florida, even though it's in Ashburn. So standard caveats apply. But if I click on that data, that actually made an API call back to our system, and we can look at it by source AS or dest AS, and if we've done the integration, so boom, it brings us right back into our portal and is pre-populates the filters in the query. So we wanted something that was at Akamai we called it a FAD, a funding augmentation device. Stick it up there and people go, ooh, we now have intelligence, but make it useful so someone could actually go get it. And this view also has, you can look by time, you can look, now I think there was a bug when I looked at it, but we did also where you could do a custom where clause. No, there we go. So we could say, okay, only show me protocol 1. So now that's the ICMP view. And one interesting thing we decided not to cheat on, let me, is, now if you're looking at ICMP, a lot of times you actually just get people randomizing, so it appears to come from all over the place. Sometimes actually we have a bunch of traffic that is at coordinates 0, 0, because that's something which has no geolocation in the database. So it's an easy way to see that it's from some /8 that isn't even routed. And again, we view this as something we built quickly, get customer feedback for, we'll put into the portal. But this itself is just using APIs to get us. So this took a couple weeks for us to do. So we really try to be agnostic. I mentioned before everyone got here about delivery. If people want it on-prem, we'll do that. If they want to use our SaaS, we prefer that. If people want to use entirely their own, we've had people that have just shut down Vertica and just use us for fraud detection based on IP because they can just run the SQL queries. Or if people say, you are my vendor, you will put this in the portal, we say, okay, we'll find 4 more of you, and then when 5 of you want it, we'll do it. Like that. So we used to have a really cool thing, we still have a really cool thing for peering analytics. It's just, it used to be cooler when it was the only place that you could get the flow diagrams, but now we have put this kind of flow mapping. There are some queries, though, for which one SQL query can't get you the richness of it. And so for providers, how many of you guys have worked with people that actually go out and peer with other networks that they need to get to for their business purposes? I know.
Yeah, we do.
Keep your hand down. But, a lot of times people are interested in saying, not only, I send traffic to my next hop is 23352. I forget, maybe that's Highwinds. Let's go into 2914, which is NTT America. Maybe I should get a connection to them. So when you can visualize this, sometimes it becomes very clear what's going on. And again, you can see by US, sometimes debugging load balancers, right? You might say, well, why am I sending traffic from US to Germany? Now, we don't have a I can't show you my customer's traffic. So, but when you can see 10 pops globally and you see where the traffic is going, you can debug. Has anyone had to work with Anycast, BGP Anycast? It's a pain in your toes. It can be helpful to have some data for that. So with this, we made it so that it takes a minute to crunch all your routers and show you that. I'll show you the alerting system again. Very functional. I'll tell you, a lot of our customers didn't think they had DDoS attacks, and it turns out they did. A lot of our customers thought they had DDoS attacks, and it turned out to be load balancer misconfigs, or someone pounding their API, right? So if your host has a lot of traffic, what is it? I don't know. You need to be able to look at it, and often you don't know in advance. Now, again, I thought, oh my God, everyone wants what Akamai does. Just the same way I would say, not everyone wants to run exactly what Google or LinkedIn does today, but it's indicative of techniques you can do. So our alerting system today, we populate the SQL queries. We tell people what it's for. You can edit the parameters in the SQL query. And then it's got look back windows for, and our customers today are mostly interested in not being woken up for BS. So that's a big difference we've seen from operations versus security. Security is full of the machines that go bing and they want log lines and all that, but the people we have today, they don't, and also, our customers tend to think of 10 gig as the minimum unit of everything, so they don't care about 100 megabits here or 200 megabits there. So we started with a packets per second, bits per second, unique IP addresses, static thresholds. But the next version, which we'll have in a month, so in 6 months I'll show you guys, is baselining and also has a non-SQL based builder. But that's been useful. Right now, all of the alerts share what do you do with the alert? So we've got a notification URL, which is the API call. That's becoming different per user and per alert as well. So one other thing I'll show you, this has all been based on actually a poor little soup 3BXL that's been running tens of gigs of traffic for a while and bravely doing flow export. But if we clear all this, reset Data Explorer. I apologize, I'm the CEO, so I'm not up on the latest everything. Let me kill all the filters and focus in on, let's just look at Dest AS for one of the servers that we have a host agent on. So when we've got a server, this is just looking at source AS, that opens up more dimensions. I don't know if that's big enough. So normally we do packets per second, bits per second, unique source IPs and Dest IPs, but that's all we can get from standard NetFlow. So as I mentioned, we work with nprobe. If you look at nTop Shop, they're not a marketing company, you can see all the decoders they have. So then we get retransmits, out of order packets, fragments. We get the SYN to SYNAC latency, the SYNAC to active SYNAC latency, and an estimate of basically the time to first byte, so the application latency. And so that begins to get into what we really think of as the network performance management. So a lot of enterprise people think performance is it full or is it not, but it's much more grayscale than that. So we can look at this device and say, okay, let's look at the client latency. And we can do all this in the alerting system too. It's all the same thing, right? If I can get the SQL query. You can do the same thing in the REST API to get that data. So we're focused on networks where client latency is high. Now, this is in Ashburn, so you would expect that the German networks would be high, but well, Comcast is not yet a valued customer. I hope they will be at some point, but Comcast is on there. You've got some other, Aweka, some other networks. So you can focus, but we can also just say, okay, well, that's interesting. Let's include that network as a filter and actually just change down to, let's look at the actual prefix. So now we've got some performance data, but we can actually look down to the IP address, or I could add IP to IP and see the flow and get some data. Now, you really have to be careful about being too sensitive because retransmits are part of how TCP works. Latency sometimes bursts, and again, you don't want to be woken up, but over time that's interesting. The other thing that's interesting is to look at the application latency. And I actually have, in another window, I have to be careful because if I do the AS view, it will show our customers. But let me maximize this. So this is the application, the server latency, on one of our servers. And we can actually see that port 8300, that blue line, is console, which is one of the hippie things that we plan to evict from our network pretty quickly. I don't understand why you need hippie things when you could just do dynamic DNS and replicate DNS, which we know how to do, but turns out when you actually try to have 50 machines running console and it wants only 3, that doesn't work. So we already use some of this. We can see down, if I turn this off, we can actually see our portal versus different API ports, what some of the application performance is. And again, we're not doing, this year, web transaction, everything that happened, but okay, I see my keynote has gone off, or my RUM, my application performance. Is it the network or is it the application? We're pulling in the data if we can get it from the host or a sensor to help people look at that. So those are the kinds of things that we're doing. Going a little deeper this summer, we're going to have an integration with Pcap Sensors. So the flow you can basically click get Pcap and get some Pcap and throw it to Wireshark. More time series data integrations, really customer driven. Over the second half of the year, we're going to work to get into more classic enterprises, financials and manufacturing companies. I think a lot more of that is on the security side, and we'll have to see again, that's where Pcap comes up. A lot of them, they have these RFPs. Have you guys heard of Cisco OpenSOC? It's they use nprobe also. It's just a big data stack for keeping your flow forever. And Pcap. We've seen a lot of people struggle with that, and we think we could be helpful there. So we're looking for feedback, looking for people to try it.
What about pricing model?
So we charge per year per exporting device from, you could think of it as list price is $6,000 a year for terabit BGP router down to tens of dollars, but not single-digit dollars per host, right? So we do, and we're not really set up as a company to do directly someone with 3 hosts. So it's more like you still need to be spending a few $1,000s a month with us. What we're doing is actually we're launching this summer a free offering with Grafana. So the Grafana dashboard I showed you, there's a company, Grafana, it's RainTank, that's commercializing it. Torkel, who forked Kibana and made Grafana, is forking it. And we're just going to offer everyone in the world 10 free devices of Top Talker only. So basically boundary for free.
Right,
and if you want to click and slice and dice, our thesis is then people will have an exact problem we can exactly help with. So we want it to be available, but have to make a company and make it make some money.
Right, cool.
So with your SaaS offering, are you storing the customer data within your SaaS app, or are you live querying it?
We are. We're storing it. I'll talk about architecture, and we can store data for like an on-prem or for customer close to where the geo is, but then the queries slow down a little bit, and if your network partitions, we can't get at the data, so it's a trade-off. We are, and we even have EU customers, like big EU companies sending data to us as a US company, and even in the US. It turns out that separate from Safe Harbor, there's actually some model clauses language that they have for sending data to companies in evil countries like ours. That's even pre-Trump, God help us. Now, today it's mostly, it is IP address, which is PII in many places. And it will be even more augment, certificate name, DNS query, things like that for people that want it.
And how far back are you storing that data? So you had a time query in there. How far back can it go? Because I know network things are very time critical, and usually when we have a problem on the network, we need to get on it pretty quickly because it's going to drag on too long or the situation's going to change. So you need to be on there. But when you're looking at more long-term stuff in terms of how has it performed overall to do a bit of future planning or that kind of depth of troubleshooting, how far back can we go in the analytics?
We typically store 90 days at the full retention, and people can store longer if they want. So let me just, to reset, let me go into one of these queries. And what we do is we store hourly resampled data, so you get a first answer that's really fast. But if you want security forensics, if you just leave it, it'll fill in for the, down to the record, querying of everything. So it's really based on policy. Questions, comments, thoughts? I'll tell you, I mentioned data center. We haven't done anything specifically with wireless, the wireless folks. We haven't done anything specific with mobile. We can take those protocol decodes and could easily put them in. It's not an area that we have the expertise in, and in some ways now we have enough that we need to let the customers tell us what they want. But it's really that, I think for us it's that tension between is the next step, the APM side, and Gartner just said we're a new cool company in APM, so they've voted. The interesting thing from a practitioner or state-of-the-art point of view is service providers say, could you please take threat feeds and show our customers they need to buy our security services, or even integrators, right? But we have really great conversations with user-facing infrastructure operators who go, oh wait, I can see that from the network, who didn't realize that you could actually take, we've been talking about AVC, and Citrix has AppFlow from the NetScaler, but no one actually knows what you can do with this, because there's companies that run on a Windows machine, like LiveAction does great QoS visibility, but it's not architected like this. So a lot of the customers we talk to don't even realize that they could actually get this network versus application view. And so I'm sort of Dr. Vision, and my CTO, who sold me my first T1 in 1994, he started his ISP a year after mine in 1993. He's Dr. Focus. So he's like, look, we need to get the complete Arbor thing. So it's a little bit of a tension for us of let's build what we know people will want, but we have to unveil it and then let people drive that. So
when you look at the network versus application, how do you see it, I guess, in terms of the enterprise space? Because there's a lot of these tools, if you want to, have extra help you mentioned and correlate a lot of these together, how do you kind of view that sort of playing out longer term?
So if you ask me my longer term, I'll say 2 years, because I can't look, no one can look 5 years, which I think is cool. The whole space is really moving. Yeah. Like in the 90s, like warp speed, like being an ISP in the 90s, like no idea what's going to be coming. People need the basic visibility that you don't get from only looking at sensors. They need to take data from routers and switches and servers and stuff like that, and they don't have a good platform that's open and interfaces with the rest of the tools. So we've got a place to come in there. There's stuff that people want us to do that we just can't do, like the complete waterfall diagram. We need 20 engineers to go do that in 6 months, and we can't do that. But I think it's actually even more exciting than that, because I think we can do everything that Sev1 and ExtraHop do. And Sev1 is basically federated appliances, but they call it peer-to-peer, so it's all fancy. But more. So a lot of, APM and network performance monitoring are these different things. But why? What's the difference? APM is, I instrument the app stack, I have the application do some stuff, and then typically it's missing the network view. I had a really fun conversation, I won't tell you with which one, but one of the big 3 APM companies with their ops folks. And they're like, they're in public cloud, they're in a data center, they don't control it. Like, wouldn't it be cool if you could see when you have a client latency problem, if it was the server or the network or the application? They're like, yeah, that would be awesome. But their own tools don't do that. But the network, the NPM tools don't try to integrate with the systems. Like, what are the systems doing? So the next thing we're going to do is sysdig, right? nprobe can look in and take sysdig data, right? So ultimately, I actually think if you look at what's happening in some of the Go land, like the per function call or the streaming metrics.
Right.
Like you guys all want, and everyone is asking about streaming analytics, right? Protobuf from the Juniper and you know,
Right.
so all that stuff. Well, that's more simple metrics, but why isn't the application doing that too? I think when we get the network layer doing that, so we can get queue depth purport, routing changes and all that, the traffic metadata, but also the application data, I think that's where
Yeah.
it's going, and that's where we're hoping to be, is come at it from the real 360 degree.
But in general, though, and just I saw the demo, you know, Cisco and you know SignalFX, you know, so you can take streaming data, push it off box from an XR platform. So can we push that kind of data to your platform?
Today, we're not taking that kind of streaming data. What we're doing is most of our customers have generally on-prem, sometimes SignalFX. Yelp uses us and SignalFX.
Okay.
Right? That's why we built the Grafana integration. Is so we've said we don't have to be master on everything. If you have a metric system, because what else is in there? It's already, they have some application metrics. They have their server metrics.
Right.
We could do that. It's super simple. We can go get the server density stuff, and we can fire up Prometheus or whatever.
Right.
But I'd rather focus on this and just partner. We're also partnering with companies like Alvik, who does topology discovery and config management. So they're using us for flow, and we just point people to them if they want that kind of functionality, because there's only so much we can do as a startup.
Right. Cool.
How do you guys kind of play with to Jason's point on the enterprise with something like a Splunk that's taking massive amounts of unstructured data and normalizing it and giving you essentially full visibility into anything you can possibly essentially construct a query for, right? So you can actually look for. I mean, how do you guys work with that or compete with that or what have you?
Well, it's interesting because we're actually working with customers of ours who have Splunk and us.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And what is that gap that you're filling, I guess, that they're not providing?
Right. So basically, it's that you can't afford to put the machine-to-machine data at full resolution in Splunk. That's what our customers are telling us. That's what
Yeah, it's expensive.
It's expensive. So we look at it two ways. Now, ultimately, if the customer really wants to do fast join of all their data, there's a limit to what we can do on external integration, because there's just latency. You kind change the laws of physics, right? So what we're doing is two things. One, and this is before the Kafka, just because we have Splunk customers that want it, it's stream copies of the flows that people define as interesting, and what Grafana pulls from us as the top talkers, basically you can schedule in Splunk, you can make a scheduled call, pull it via the API, and they have a database connector, so it can use our SQL API. Now it's in Splunk. The second thing that we're doing is highlight an IP, and it'll go back to us and pull the history and get it out. It's not going to be a perfect thing, but if you think about it, we don't view Elastic really as a competition, even though it's what DIY people use. Splunk does, right? So for Splunk, and Elastic is doing beats, and they're doing all these things, to try to get into the infrastructure. So we're hopeful that we can be, a good partner there. And right now, we're just letting the customers do that.
Okay.
We let the customer summon the vendor, and we're there.
As it should be.
Let's just go build this. So I don't know if you ever played with Splunk, but it failed my 20-minute test of like.
Well, it's not a 20-minute solution, but it's incredibly powerful when you dive into it.
Yeah.
But it is
I agree.
It is expensive to store the amount of data that you really want to analyze.
And there's a large player in our general space called Guavas that does, really they start with the business intelligence, which is where Splunk is saying they are.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really nervous about going too far that way, too fast, because I don't want to be like SAP and integrating with your DBase systems and all that. Like, we'd rather just make it open and show people how to do it, and then have services people do that. But Splunk definitely is, it's yet another use case in the user set often, right, and security. Okay. So we're just learning about how to integrate. Feel free to flame. You can actually just sign up online and try it. Promise not to pester you. Well, we'll reach out to you, but you don't need to respond. You can set up devices, play with it. Love feedback. On my list of long things to do is to actually ping you about some of the automation stuff and.
Cool.
because we have an API, so basically when someone fires something up, they can set it all up. Actually, Russ, before we talked some about the Linux switching, and I've been pounding Plexi and Cumulus and all that. Really, the old Broadcoms couldn't do what we really wanted to get the performance data, because they can only do packet sampling. But the new Broadcom chipset can let you subscribe to a hash of streams, which could get the header stream that we need to do the performance stuff. And really, that's what we ultimately would like to do. Sort of the same thing that everyone wants from streaming, from the switches, at least with samples of the traffic, right? And then you can really, again, maybe you don't care if there's queue depth on switches, if it isn't affecting anything, who cares?
Right.
I got better things to do, so.